All right, y'all. So we're back here. We're talking about the failures of the provisional government. We talked about Kerensky, who clearly is no longer embracing that social revolutionary ideology. We have these social revolutionaries really thinking maybe they need to go to the Soviets. We have this dual government, and now we have a kind of a German agent here, Lenin, who's been captured, kidnapped by the Germans, dropped off, and now Lenin is going to start preaching against the provisional government. And what do we see here? I want to point out he claimed to be the Orthodox Marxist who led to the schism that formed the Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks become this quote unquote Orthodox Marxist party, really defined by Leninism. Leninism is really found, if you're looking for a primary source, the April Thesis of 1917. Really great. It's part of his publication when he entered that city of Riga. There's three parts that Dr. McKay really points out. Number one, he argued that only through a violent revolution could Russia turn into a communist country. So this is where he really identifies himself as an Orthodox Marxist because he's rejecting the Mensheviks. The Mensheviks were the revisionists who were hoping that the provisional government would ultimately lead to a communist society. Lenin said, heck no, that's all fake. This is the real. The second thing is he argued that a peasant proletariat revolution would achieve Russian communism. So he's rejecting that traditional pathway of Marxism. He's like, we don't need a bourgeoisie. We don't need this type of a system. We can go from agrarian into communism. Again, clearly not as orthodox as he thinks, but that peasant proletariat revolution is really a definitive element. And lastly, instead of a spontaneous revolution, because remember, that's the whole thing about Marx, a spontaneous proletariat revolution. He believed that a vanguard of professional revolutionaries would organize and lead the revolution. So these are three definitive parts of this Leninism that, though he claims to be an Orthodox Marxist, he's actually just a different version of a revisionist. Yes, revolution is the way to go, but that peasant proletariat revolution and a vanguard of revolutionaries are distinctly different. And in April 1917, he demanded the Bolsheviks to reject the provisional government, do not participate in any realm. And this really created some anxiety for the Bolsheviks that had lived in Russia. Remember, Lenin had been in exile for years, so these Bolsheviks, they felt like they were more in touch with the reality. But Lenin had absolute power, and he promised them that they would find a way to gain power. And how does he do this? He begins to use propaganda. My favorite slogan he used is peace, land, bread. Peace, we're going to get out of the war. Land to the peasants. Bread, we're going to feed the people. He was playing on the desires. He understood the public opinion in some ways. He decried all power to the Soviets, playing on that social revolutionary idea. He's saying, hey, we could be a anarchist country in which the Soviets hold power, all power, which is countering the provisional government. He simplified it, all land to the peasants, promising to get rid of the others. Stop the war now. So these were slogans that he's utilizing to really tap into the psyche of the Russians, that he alone represents their desires, where the provisional government was more about democracy that would fail to solve their issues. And this leads us right to the November Revolution. Throughout the summer of 1917, the Bolshevik resistance to the provisional government made them a very popular party. You saw that they go into the hundreds of thousands of members of their party. Their anti-war population, the anti-war propaganda, really kind of drove them. Leon Trotsky, who was a Menshevik at one point, becomes now a real convert to Leninism. He became a key leader of that Petrograd Soviet. He was a passionate believer in Leninism and was a great orator. He was really good at the rhetoric, talking to the people, catching their attention. And in November 6th, The militants led by Trotsky seized power from the provisional government, and they declared Lenin to be the new leader of Russia. And this is nearly another peaceful revolution. Yes, there's several people that get shot dead in the Winter Palace, but I'm going to just go ahead and emphasize this is not is the second revolution that we see that we might see in other areas. This is pretty much peaceful. Kerensky, knowing he's out of power, is swept away by the United States ambassador. Kerensky will live the rest of his life in New York, and really there's this idea now. Russia now is a communist country. And I like that what McKay does. He three real simplistic ideas here. How did the November Revolution succeed? Number one, the promise of democracy had turned into anarchy. People without any relationship with political democracy, they really grew angsty. They were scared. So they're looking for leadership. And that's Lenin and Trotsky provided this unquestioned leadership. There was no division. Lenin and Trotsky, Lenin number one, Trotsky number two, they're leading together. And third, Lenin immediately acted on his promises. Where the provisional government got kind of, hey, we're gonna get there, we're gonna get there. He immediately begins to react. And how does he fulfill his promises? The first, peace. They immediately negotiate an end to this war. There is a little bit of chaos that kind of leads to that. I don't think that's that necessary for us to get into those weeds. But by March 1918, the treaty or peace of Brest-Litovsk ended the war. A little bit later, we're going to analyze the dramatic amount of land they lose. They lose Poland, they lose the Baltic states, they lose parts of the Ukraine. This is devastating. But Lenin realized he needed to show the people that he was bringing peace. Land, all he really does is recognize and support the peasant seized land. The peasants had attacked the monasteries, attacked the nobility, and they've claimed this land. Bread, well, we're going to see that this is a promise that probably is not kept. And it's really chaotic. There is a dramatic famine. And a lot of times we want to blame Lenin for the famine, and I think there's to blame. But remember, we're coming out of this war. There's complete collapse. So what does Lenin do? He blamed the whites, the Civil War and the whites for the devastating famine. And as we form this dictatorship, that last little promise that is in your paper about the Soviets, what happened to the Soviets? He completely ignored the Soviets. And instead, he's going to form this single-party dictatorship. And how does he do that? Well, number one, Lenin feared the Social Revolutionary Party. The Social Revolutionary Party, I've already defined, it's peasant anarchy. They're really, really close, really close at gaining power here. They won over twice as many seats as the Bolsheviks in the Constituent Assembly. It was clear that the Social Revolutionary Party, if this Constituent Assembly convened and continued and they wrote a new constitution, it would be out of control. So Lenin couldn't control this. So that's why within 2 days of this assembly meeting in January 1918, as you see this image, the Bolshevik army raided it and shut it down. They declared that these were anarchists, these were the Democrats, these were foreign agents, and we can't trust them. So Lenin disbanded the meeting, and really by the end of January 1918, Lenin had centralized power and was leading this new government in a dictatorship. And the promises of the Soviets completely ignored, and that's going to lead us right to the Civil War. I'm going to stop here, and we'll finish this up in the next